Hello everyone, welcome back. In today's video we have another news and rumor video to discuss. In today's video we're looking at some signings, some injury updates, a couple of pieces of news involving a retirement, a coaching update, and a couple of player updates. And we've also got a couple of trade rumors involving the Leafs, the Islanders, the Senators, and a couple of other teams. We'll get to all of that coming up right now. Hello everyone, welcome back to another video here at the End-to-End Hockey channel. Now before we begin this video, don't forget to like this video and subscribe below. Thank you for all of your support. I would never be able to do this without all of you guys. So if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe down below. It really does help the channel, and we're on the road to 500 subscribers. And don't forget to leave a comment down in the comment section below discussing all this discussed in today's video. So in today's video, we've got another news and rumor video to discuss. So we've got a lot of things to talk about, trade rumors, a couple of pieces of news. We're going to start as we usually do. We're talking about some signings from our past couple of days. There were a couple of interesting ones. We got 8 signings to talk about here. We're almost caught up on the signing stuff. Not quite yet. These signings were from about a week and a half ago. So we're getting closer, but we're not completely caught up yet. So we're going to look at 8 signings here. Most of these are ELCs. So first, the Columbus Blue Jackets gave an ELC to Oiva Keskinen. Keskinen, who was a center prospect, 7th round pick back in the 2023 draft, gets a 3-year ELC, AAV of $860,000. I think he was playing over the SHL last year. I might be wrong, but looks like a pretty decent prospect. I think eventually might be able to be like a bottom 6 guy for the Jackets. So interesting note there, but the Jackets have signed one of their late round picks back in 2023 to an ELC. Then we saw the Washington Capitals sign Ryan Chesley. Chesley's a right shot defenseman prospect, 37th overall pick, 2nd rounder back in the 2022 draft. Gets a 3-year ELC with AAV of $923,000. Chelsea looks like a really good prospect. Chesley, I think eventually will be a very fantastic second pair right shot defenseman for the Capitals. Maybe not next year, but in the next year or two, he should definitely be challenging for NHL opportunities after a solid season over in the NCAA. So interesting note there, but the Capitals have signed Chesley. Then we saw the Minnesota Wild sign right wing / center Danila Yurov, who was a 1st round pick, 24th overall back in 2022. Signed a 3-year ELC with AAV of $950,000. Yurov is one of the best prospects in the Minnesota Wild system. Another Russian prospect. Could be a guy who can work really well with a guy like Kirill Kaprizov. I think he's going to be a very fantastic fit in the Minnesota Wild top 6, potentially as early as next year. So very interesting stuff there. But former 1st round pick Danila Yurov, who has been playing over in the KHL, signs a 3-year ELC and could challenge for a roster spot next year. Then we saw San Jose Sharks give an extension out, gave a 1-year $800,000 extension out to Igor Afanaseyev. Afanaseyev, who's a left wing / center, played the entire season last year at the AHL, was acquired by San Jose last offseason for Ozzy Weisblatt from Nashville. So that was an interesting swap there between the Sharks and the Predators. I do think that Afanaseyev, while he might not get into any NHL action next year, could easily be a call-up option as a really good AHL player. So the Sharks bring back a little bit of depth from last year as they signed Afanaseyev to an extension. Then we saw the Boston Bruins sign goalie prospect Simon Zajac to a 1-year contract with the AAV of $873,000. He's an undrafted guy. I think played over in Europe last year. I might be wrong on that, but Zajac looks like a pretty good prospect, and I think maybe could challenge for like a backup role at some point. So interesting note there, but Zajac has been signed by the Boston Bruins. Then the Tampa Bay Lightning signed a goaltending prospect of their own as they signed Harrison McGinn to a 3-year ELC with AAV of $873,000. McGinn is 20 years old. He was a 7th round pick back in this past year's draft, 2024. I think eventually McGinn could be challenging for like a backup role for the Tampa Bay Lightning. So interesting note there, but the Bulls signed a late round draft selection from last year in the goaltending side to an ELC. Then we saw Vegas Golden Knights and one of their top level prospects, Tuomas Joronen, to a 3-year ELC with AAV of $853,000. He was a 6th round pick back in 2023. He's a winger prospect. I could eventually see him in maybe like 2 to 3 years time challenge like a backup role, but at this point in time he's probably just going to play the AHL level. So interesting note there. And then we saw one last signing from our past couple of days, and that was in Ottawa as the Senators have signed center / winger prospect Lucas Alenius to a 3-year ELC with AAV of $875,000. That's for next year and the following few seasons. Alenius is going to be a really good prospect. He was a 4th round pick back in this past year's draft. I think eventually could be a decent top 9 forward there for the Senators. So very interesting stuff there. I think this is going to be a really solid prospect signing by the Ottawa Senators. So some interesting signings like Alenius, Yurov, and Chesley all get ELCs from the Sens, Wild, and Capitals respectively. While we also saw Afanaseyev get a new contract extension with the San Jose Sharks. So interesting note there. Lots of interesting signings from the past couple of days. Next, going over to a couple of injury updates. So when it comes to the injury update, we're talking about all 4 teams from the conference finals. So Sam Reinhart, who left game 2 of the Eastern Conference Final with a lower body injury, didn't play in both game 3 and game 4 and remains out day to day. So it's a bad blow there for the Panthers. Reinhart is a very fantastic top 6 forward. So to see him out is a loss in production, which isn't overly great for the Panthers. Well, Nico Mikkola and AJ Greer both left game 3 with undisclosed injuries and did not play in game 4. So those were bad blows there for the Panthers. They were without one of their better defensemen, a solid bottom 6 forward, and one of their top 6 goal scorers for game 4 of the Eastern Conference Final, which was all really bad stuff there for Florida. For Edmonton, Mattias Ekholm wasn't available for their game 3 of the Western Conference Final. It's a bad blow there. There was some speculation maybe he could be ready, but it doesn't seem like that. He might be ready for game 4, probably at least for game 5, but Ekholm is nearing a return. Even though he didn't get into any NHL action in game 3, he is still nearing a return, while Connor Brown left game 3 due to an upper body injury and might miss game 4 due to it. There's still a possibility he could play, but it's sounding more and more likely that Connor Brown will wind up not playing for the Edmonton Oilers in game 4, so that could be a really bad blow there for the Oilers. Roope Hintz left game 2 after getting slashed on the ankle by Darnell Nurse and missed game 3 due to it. Is day-to-day right now with the lower body injuries, so hopefully Roope Hintz is going to be back in the very near future. He's a big piece of the Dallas Stars team, so hopefully he won't miss too much time, but it's a bad blow there for Dallas. Well, for Carolina, Jalen Chatfield and Sean Walker both remain out with an undisclosed injury, are out day-to-day, and missed both game 3 and game 4 for the Carolina Hurricanes. So those are some bad blows. The Carolina Hurricanes had to roll with rookies Morrow and Nikishin in their places in game 4. They did get the win, which was a must-win game there for Carolina, but those are some bad blows there for the Hurricanes. So lots of interesting stuff from our past couple of days injury-wise, but Chatfield, Walker missed game 3 and 4 for Carolina. Hintz missed game 3 for Dallas. Ekholm missed game 3 for Edmonton, and Connor Brown might miss game 4 for Edmonton, while Mikkola, Greer, and Reinhart all missed game 4 for Florida, so interesting note there. And next going over to a couple of pieces of news from our past couple of days. So not too much here to talk about, but just a couple of interesting smaller type pieces. So first, Steven Kampfer, who used to be a bomb pair defenseman at the NHL level, has been playing in the KHL over the past couple of years, has officially called it a career. So Kampfer, who had over 200 games at the NHL level, was more of a rough and tumble type defenseman, didn't put up a whole bunch of points, but I think he played 9 seasons at the NHL level. I think Boston and Detroit was some of the organizations he played with, and he's officially called it a career. So very interesting note there. But Kampfer, who was a long-time bottom pair defenseman, has officially called it a career. So interesting note there. Now, after the New York Islanders moved on and got Matthew Darche as their new GM, there's been a lot of speculation out there that Brendan Shanahan, who was recently told that he was not going to be brought back by Toronto and is still looking for an option. I've seen a couple of reports saying he could go to Buffalo as some sort of an advisor role. So there's no guarantee he will go to Buffalo. He might look for opportunities elsewhere, but I've seen a couple of reports saying that the Sabres should maybe bring him in an advisory role, maybe on like a 1-year deal to just see how he does. Maybe help provide some more help in the front office for Kevin Adams. So we'll have to wait and see on that. Once again, no guarantees that that's going to happen, but I have heard a couple of people say that maybe one of the landing spots for Brendan Shanahan is Buffalo, which is an arch rival of the Toronto Maple Leafs, which would be very interesting. So we'll have to wait and see on that. Going over to a couple of updates when it comes to players overseas. Erik Brannstrom, who was a first-round pick a number of years back in Vegas, traded to Ottawa in the Mark Stone deal. Didn't work out overly well in Ottawa. Spent this year with Colorado, Vancouver. New York Rangers finished the season in Buffalo. Is officially going overseas and heading over to play, I think it was in the Swiss League. I might be wrong on that, but he is going overseas, so he won't be back in the NHL at least for the next couple of seasons. And Brannstrom, who at one point was a very promising NHL prospect, has now decided to sign over in Europe, so interesting note there. Well, Alexei Heponiemi, who was also a former 2017 pick back with the Florida Panthers, who has also been playing over in Europe over the past couple of years, seems to be open to maybe making an NHL comeback. It's no guarantees or anything, but Heponiemi, who was at one point a top prospect for the Florida Panthers, might be able to be brought back by Florida, and the Panthers might be able to sign him. He's still a guy who's an restricted free agent, and the Panthers still hold their rights, so we'll have to wait and see what happens there. But maybe Heponiemi gets an extension and he can go back to playing with the Florida Panthers, which would be very interesting to note there. And the last thing is going over to the Seattle Kraken. When it comes to the Kraken, a couple of recent reports have been saying that Lambert may be the front runner for the team's coaching option. Now, it's not a guarantee at this point. Nothing's finalized yet. There's still a lot of things to be going through for the Seattle Kraken. But we've heard about Michelov's name. We've heard about a couple of other guys. I think Leach was mentioned for the Kraken. We know David Quinn was. But it seems like Lambert is starting to emerge as the front runner. The former Islanders head coach, I think it was an assistant with Toronto last year, is looking for another coaching opportunity. And it might be with the Seattle Kraken. Like, I think there are better options out there for the Kraken. Like, I think Mitch Love would be a perfect opportunity for the Seattle Kraken's new head coach. But if they don't go with Mitch Love, another interesting option could be Lambert, who might be a very solid add there for the Seattle Kraken, who would have his second head coaching stint after just a couple of years ago playing as the head coach of the New York Islanders. So very interesting note there. But it does sound like Lambert is the front runner in Seattle. So lots of interesting news updates from our past couple of days as Kampfer is retired. Shanahan might be able to go to Buffalo in an advisory role. Heponiemi might be coming back to the NHL while Brannstrom's going overseas. And Lambert is the front runner in Seattle. So lots of interesting stuff from our past couple of days. Next, going over to a couple of trade rumors. And lastly here, going over to a couple of trade rumors. So we got a lot of interesting trade rumors here to discuss. So a couple of days ago, I think it was Chris Johnston who mentioned this. It might have been someone else, but there was a couple of people who were talking about what sort of RFAs could be offer sheeted this season. Like, who are some of those types of players like a Dylan Holloway or Philip Broberg from last year. And a guy who was mentioned, I think it was by Chris Johnston, was Mavrik Bourque. Now, Bourque is a really solid bottom six guy in Dallas. He's in the final year of his ELC. Bourque, I think, was a former first round pick, might have been a second round pick, but was a really high draft selection a couple of years back for Dallas, and looks like he has a really bright future. Now, the Dallas Stars aren't in the best cap situation. Rantanen and Johnston extensions are just about to kick in. They have Ben, Granlund, and CC as UFAs, and if they don't bring those guys back, they'll have to go in free agency and get someone else. So they're not in the best cap situation, and with that in mind, that leads them to potentially being a team who could get offer sheeted. Bourque, I think, could be a similar situation to Holloway, where a team maybe offer sheets them like $2.5 million on an AAV, and that's a little bit too rich for Dallas's blood. But I can see Bourque fit into maybe the team's like a third or second line and contribute quite well, given the fact it was a former first round pick and what he's been able to do in the AHL level. So in my opinion, I can see Bourque being one of the top offer sheet candidates out there, given the Stars cap situation and what Bourque could bring. So we'll have to keep our eye on Bourque. No guarantees he will get offer sheet, but he's at least an offer sheet candidate out there. So we'll have to wait and see on that. Next, going over to Mitch Marner and his current situation. Now, I think it was Pierre LeBrun a couple days ago over on TSN was talking about Mitch Marner and said that a couple of teams who definitely would have interest if Marner hit the free agent market were Chicago, Anaheim, and Detroit, amongst a couple of other teams. Like, there's going to be a ton of teams who would have interest. Well, it does sound like Marner is open to going to teams like Florida and Vegas, to teams who are in non-tax states who have been winning a whole bunch recently. Seem to be some of Marner's preferred destinations. But another interesting thing to note here is that there were no Canadian teams announced on either of the teams who had some interest or teams where Marner would be willing to go and play for. So with that in mind, it seems like Marner is probably not going to go to Canada if he does leave Toronto. So you can basically count out Montreal, Ottawa, Edmonton, Calgary, Vancouver, Winnipeg as teams who could potentially sign Mitch Marner. It does not sound like Marner wants to stay in Canada, and he'll probably go to the US if he does wind up hitting free agency. So no guarantees as to where he's going to go. There's going to be a ton of teams out there, but it's starting to get the hints out there that Marner's probably not going to sign in with a Canadian team if he does hit the free agent market. So definitely keep your eye on that. But it does seem like Anaheim, Chicago, Detroit may have some major interest. So I have to wait and see on that. We're going to go over to the Leafs, and we know that there's a very likely chance Mitch Marner could wind up leaving. So staying with the Leafs, and a potential option they could go after to sort of replace Mitch Marner, and that is Chris Kreider. I think it was Chris Johnson who also mentioned this, as Kreider could be a guy who the Leafs try and target. It might have been someone else who mentioned this, but we know Kreider's going to get moved. He's making $6.5 million for 2 more seasons. He's a former 50 goal scorer, but last year only had 22 goals in the relationship between him and and the Rangers has really soured over the past while. So it definitely seems like Kreider is going to be traded at some point. I don't know exactly which team could try for him. Like, I think Buffalo will be a team interested. Ottawa might be a team interested. There's definitely a couple of other teams, and now seems to be throwing in Toronto into the mix. Now, at least makes sense if they're moving away from Marner, potentially moving away from Tavares. Like, you're going to have a whole bunch more cap space. They're probably still going to have to sign Nyes, but with that in mind, Kreider could be an interesting pickup there for the New York Rangers. Like, I think Kreider at 6.5, if they can get him back up to being like at least a 40 goal scorer, that could be a massive boost for the Leafs, because I think while Marner is a better point producer and all-around player, Kreider is definitely a better goal scorer than Marner is. So we'll have to wait and see on that, but keep your eye on Kreider and potentially the Toronto Maple Leafs as a potential option to sort of replace some of the production that Marner might leave if he hits free agency. Next, going over to the Ottawa Senators, when it comes to them, both Bruce Garrioch and David Pagnotta were mentioning that a potential option for the Ottawa Senators to try and fill that defensive hole in their team is Rasmus Andersson. Andersson is a solid top 4 right shot defenseman, and like I said, there's no guarantees Andersson will get moved. Last year in the offseason, there was a lot of speculation that he would get moved either before last year's trade deadline or at some point this offseason. Then closer to last year's trade deadline, there was a lot of speculation that Andersson would sign an extension with Calgary, but now more and more rumors are pumping up that Andersson is a very likely chance to be traded at some point, and it seems like Ottawa might have some major interest. It sounds like, according to Bruce Garrioch and David Pagnotta, Shane Pinto might be a very likely option that the Flames would target in an Andersson deal. I'm not sure if the Sens Shane Pinto is the best option, but we have seen them be a little bit bold moving Josh Norris to Dylan Cousins. It might make sense for trading Pinto to add Andersson, given their center depth. It might make some sense, especially with the fact that Greg can play center as well. So interesting note there. I'm not going to say it's a guarantee. I still highly doubt that this team trades Pinto, and it does seem like there's still a possibility Andersson could get extended instead of moved by Calgary. So we will have to wait and see on that, but there's a possibility out there that the Sens right shot defensive problems could be solved by going after Rasmus Andersson. So we'll have to wait and see on that. And lastly here, going over to 2 updates from Mat Larkin to Daily Faceoff. Now, he was talking about a couple of players who could get some change of scenery, like players who need a fresh start. And 2 players he mentioned that I feel like are very interesting potential trade candidates for this offseason are Trevor Zegras in Anaheim and Matthew Barzal in the Islanders organization. Now, Zegras has this year left on his contract at a $5.75 million cap hit, then he'll be an RFA. With the contract negotiations and how poorly they went the last time he was an RFA, I could see why the Ducks might want to move on from him. Also, this past year and last year, injuries were a horrible derailment for Zegras this season. Even when he wasn't injured, Zegras really was not the dynamic player he was in his rookie or sophomore season. We know the Ducks are going to want to push for the playoffs next year. They were very close to a point per game team, and they feel like they can be a playoff caliber team next year, so they're going to be making some aggressive moves to try and improve this team, and maybe moving Zegras is a potential option there for the Ducks. I'm not going to say it's a guarantee because Zegras is still a really good player, but if he was available, there would be a ton of teams who would line up to try and get him because they can find him a really good role, and he goes back to being his rookie or sophomore self. I think a lot of other teams will have some major interest in Zegras, so we're going to have to wait and see on that. I also think the fact that he's only got 1 year left on his deal also makes him a really good hot commodity, so we'll have to wait and see on all of those stuff. But keep your eye on Zegras. Mat Larkin says is a potential change of scenery candidate, so we'll have to wait and see on that. And lastly, going over to Barzal. Barzal is a very interesting one. Mat Larkin says that he's not fitting overly well with the Islanders. He spent a whole bunch of time this year out due to injuries, and even when he was healthy, like, he didn't play the greatest. Like, Barzal, I think on the right team could be a 90 to 100 point player. I feel he can be one of the best talents in the NHL, but it doesn't seem like he's doing that with the Islanders organization. Like, he's barely gotten close to his rookie point total after his rookie season. So, like, I know that there's new GM in NYI with Darsh. I know they still have Wah. I just don't know if Barzal is going to reach his full potential in the Islanders organization. Now, he's on a longer-term deal. I think he's signed for like 6 or 7 more years, over $9 million. Would not be one bit surprised if he stayed in the Islanders organization and they tried to run with him as their top-line center. But they do have Bo Horvat. They have a couple of young up-and-coming centers in their group. There's a very likely chance they could go after a guy like Misar Hagens in this year's draft with the first overall picks. So they have options out there. Not guaranteed by any means that Barzal is going to get moved, but Mat Larkin does think there's a possibility he does get moved, and he links Vancouver and Calgary as potential landing spots because Barzal is from the West Coast and that might be a little bit of a homecoming for him. So no guarantees by any means that Barzal or Zegras get moved, but Mat Larkin definitely thinks that these two are prime change of scenery candidates, and he would not be one bit surprised if we heard these guys in the rumor mill and potentially even saw a trade in the offseason. So I think Zegras is more likely than Barzal, but with the way Barzal's played over the past couple of years, there's some potentiality out there, I think, that we could see a Barzal trade, although I do think it would take a big ask. So we're going to have to wait and see on that. But that's what I'm talking for today. That's all the trade rumors we're going to talk about. I left you guys thoughts. Do you see Barzal or Zegras getting moved? Do you think Andersson could go to Ottawa? Do you think Kreider could go to Toronto? Is Marner going to go to the States if he hits free agency? And do you think that Bourque is a potential offer sheet candidate? Definitely take your thoughts on all of that. Plus the Kampfer, Brannstrom, Lambert, Heponiemi, and Shanahan updates. And I also love to hear guys' thoughts on the injury updates and signs from our past couple of days. Definitely take your thoughts on all of that down in the comment section below. That's all I'm going to talk for today. Remember to like this video, and if you're liking, remember to subscribe down below. Thank you for all of your support. I would never be able to do this with all of you guys, so if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe button down below. It really does help with my channel. We're on the road to 500 subscribers. Don't forget to leave a comment. Also a blog to news, rumors, analysis, stuff like that, so check that out. I've linked that down in the description below. Can't wait to see you guys all for next video. See you guys soon.